Game over, man. Game over.
Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Well, welcome to this podcast review for October 9th, 2023. I'm Jada Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, for this conversation. Soon enough, we will be talking about why your money is dumb. But before we get to that...
why I am dumb for spending money on The Exorcist Believer.
Yeah, that might have to be a conversation for another time as well.
That right there is the review. I don't think we're going to do an official review for that movie. Honestly, if I didn't have a wedding to prep for this week, that's one I would probably consider doing like my own video review for, because there's actually a lot you could say about it for better and for worse. But it's a frustrating one. I'll simply say that.
Yeah, I think that's very fair, and perhaps that'll be a conversation here in a little while. Though Brendan's stealing my thunder there briefly, because I was going to say we'll get to dumb money here in a second, but I wanted to note that this is going to be the last episode ever. So soak it in, everybody. The last time you will hear Brendan's voice as a non-married man.
I was going to say, where you're going with that. I'm not going anywhere, but I might take a couple weeks off.
Yeah, no, he's not going anywhere, but he is getting married this weekend. So
that's true.
You may hear some other voices, see some other faces, depending on how you take in the show over the next few weeks. Because Brendan is getting married, and how exciting is that? I'm thrilled for you, man.
Oh, I appreciate it, man. I can't believe you're making the trip. I'm so excited to see you once again.
It's been so long.
I know. I mean, I thankfully this new format, I think, helps kind of scratch that itch a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I can't remember the last time we were actually in person together, like getting a drink together or something like that. It has been a really long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Since probably 2015, I would say.
There was probably I think I came back to Lexington for one like New Year's or something like that, and we did an episode together. You were still living there before you made the move to Florida. So that may have been it. So it may have been around 2016 or something. Yeah,
it's been a long time. And it's interesting because obviously we talk every single week here on the show, but as one could imagine, Brendan and I also talk quite often away from the microphone as well. So, you know, it's interesting how you can be so close with somebody in the internet age and never see them in person at all.
We learned that from the movie Her, right? Nothing beats human connection.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. I mean, we've talked about Ryan and Jay obviously a lot here on the show, interacted with them for quite some time, and I still have yet to see Ryan's face in person.
I know you've met Jay. I have yet to meet either of them, and I was hoping my wedding would have been a great opportunity for that. Sadly, they both can't make it. But man, that would have been a heck of a reunion to get the four of us in person for someone's wedding. Like that would have been so much fun if we were able to swing that.
I know. I was really hoping for that as well. Unfortunately, timing as it is, I will be the only one at the podcast table at the wedding. I'll be there by myself, but that's okay.
I've got you sitting with my Kentucky friends because I think you've met some of them before, so that should at least help with the introductions, I guess.
Okay, yeah. Looking.
I know some of them do listen to the show, so that'll definitely help.
Cool. Yeah, looking forward to that. I do hope that we are able to still meet up with Ryan and Jay, even though they've moved on. I still would love to do some sort of meetup down the road here, but
Disney trip.
Yeah. I'll be there in a few weeks if you guys want to join us. I
might be in Aruba by that time.
You might be. Well, actually, and that's the funny thing. So the next few days for me is also going to be really interesting because I fly to Philadelphia this weekend for your wedding, obviously. I will come back to Florida briefly, and then we will be heading just a few days after I get back here to South Florida. We will be going up to Orlando because my wife and my son's birthday, my oldest son's, are just a few days after your wedding.
Right. Yeah.
So then we'll be celebrating that and then going to Disney, and I'll be there for about 5 or 6 days.
All right. So you're gonna be exhausted by the time you're actually settled back home.
Yeah. I'm going to be doing a lot of traveling over the next 7 days.
Hopefully you don't have to work during those hours as well.
No. Maybe a little bit. And obviously I got to figure out some in-session film logistics, but yeah, it's that time of year.
It is.
You got to love it.
Yeah, it's October,
right.
baby.
Let's talk about Dumb Money. This is directed by Craig Gillespie. It stars Paul Dano, Pete Davidson, Vincent D'Onofrio, America Ferrera, Nick Offerman, Anthony Ramos, Sebastian Stan, Shailene Woodley, Seth Rogen, among others. If you're not familiar with Dumb Money, it is the ultimate David versus Goliath tale.
It is.
Based on the insane true story of everyday people who flipped the script on Wall Street and got rich by turning GameStop, the video game store, into the world's hottest company. All right.
Is that the official synopsis on IMDb?
It is. Yes.
Wow. It's a lot of hyperbole in those words.
Yeah.
That I didn't often sense during the movie.
Yeah, we'll get into that. Before we get to Dumb Money, though, I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on Craig Gillespie as a filmmaker?
I'm hit or miss. He's an interesting one because I feel like he makes two types of movies. At least if you look at his career, he's got kind of like the films that have this more gritty, almost kinetic energy to them. Movies such as I, Tonya, Lars and the Real Girl, to some extent, Fright Night, I guess, kind of fits into that mold. And Cruella, I guess, kind of has elements of it. But then he also makes what feel like just corporate mandated films like The Finest Hours or $1 Million Arm that really have none of that energy whatsoever. He is hit or miss for me, I guess, for those reasons. But he has made entertaining films, and I think I, Tonya is actually very good. And why I think those movies work is despite his energy and the way that he tells those stories, and they kind of have like a similar influence to what you'd see with like an Adam McKay or a Martin Scorsese in some ways. It kind of carries over with that same aesthetic in some ways. But he feels like he genuinely cares about the material he's telling most of the time, at least. And that's what I always respond to.
I agree. I do think there is a sincerity to his films, even if the execution isn't there. And I also appreciate, while I do agree with you, there is perhaps two categories that you could lump his films into. But I think overall, he doesn't really make the same movie twice. This is quite an eclectic mix. When you look at
quite an eclectic
Lars
mix.
and the Real Girl, Fright Night, and then he goes from that to $1 Million Arm, which is nothing like those two movies. The Finest Hour, disaster movie, I, Tonya, which is really great, a sports movie, to Cruella, and then to this, like, it just, none of those films have the same DNA, like, at all.
They mostly, I appreciate that too, and they mostly don't have the same DNA. But at the same time, I could still sense that the same director made movies like I, Tonya and Lars and the Real Girl and elements of Cruella. At least the first half of Cruella, I can kind of see some similarities there. Tonally, the way that the films move with their respective soundtracks, I think that is a huge part to those movies as well. He definitely loves music. You know, soundtracks sometimes play a character-based role in some of his movies, whether you like it or not. So there are definitely some comparisons you can make to some of his movies, but you're right. Some of those other films in between, they feel like he was just there for a paycheck or he was just hired off the job. It's this weird dichotomy going on.
For sure. All right. Well, with all of that laid out, let's go ahead and get into Dumb Money. Brendan, I think I have an idea of where this is going to go, but what did you think of it?
I'm going to give this movie a really backhanded compliment, like a big backhanded compliment.
All right. What, with like the powder and everything?
Oh, with everything. I really enjoyed this movie while I was watching it.
Okay.
And then why it's a backhanded compliment is because I thought about that statement a bit more as the movie came to its conclusion. did I enjoy that because of the story or because of the movie? And I realized it's because of the story. The story is really fascinating. That plot synopsis you laid out there is really entertaining. and I found myself intrigued because I just simply liked the story it was telling, but I don't think the movie was doing any of the work. Maybe some of the performances were, and we'll talk about some of these performances as this conversation goes, I'm sure.
Sure.
But, like that thing we were talking about earlier leading up to this about Craig Gillespie, how they're almost like these two sides to his filmography, two different styles, if you will. You've got, let's say, the I, Tanyas and then the $1 Million Arms. I feel like those two films kind of represent that split in some ways. Dumb Money is neither of those things. Like this is the first time I feel like Craig Gillespie just didn't care about this material. He feels so disinterested in this because, and I'm sure you're going to use a very specific W word that we sometimes associate with biopics these days, the storytelling approach. This is it. This is it. Because the way this movie is told is nothing more than a Wikipedia article. It's there's no other DNA to this that I can really find. And that is so unfortunate given the fascinating story at play. And like I said, I was entertained in the moment. And I just don't think the movie is doing the work, especially when you have a great cast like this who just don't really ever have an opportunity to make a stance. Maybe Paul Dano's good. Paul Dano is good here.
I agree.
If there is any saving grace to this movie, as far as how well it functions as a movie, it's mostly funneled through Paul Dano. I do think he's great. I think Pete Davidson's good. I think Shailene Woodley's good. The cast is great overall. It's just there are too many supporting roles to really have the room to make that impact. So before I get to your thoughts, did you see the miniseries Pam and Tommy that Craig Gillespie also had a hand in making? The one about Tommy.
I did not get a chance to see that yet. I've heard great things about it, but
I wouldn't go as far as to call it great. I think it's pretty good. But it made me realize that given the amount of character and the amount of story that's happening here with Dumb Money, it should have been a miniseries. I think it really should have been a miniseries and allowed Craig Gillespie that room to be a little bit creative with the camera, a little bit creative with tone. He does none of that. He just seems so disinterested here.
No, I think you hit a lot of points that I certainly want to talk about as well. And I do want to reiterate how you opened your thoughts with how appealing this story is.
Yeah.
It is David versus Goliath. And when we're talking about Wall Street, there's something about that given recent history, even going back to 2008 and what happened there, where this especially feels poignant to a lot of us, where we like to see the little guy win, especially when they're taking on these greedy, wealthy hedge fund CEOs in Wall Street. We've even had this discourse a little bit within the film industry when we're talking about the greedy studios in Hollywood with the WGA and the PGA over the summer as well. So this is a story that has a lot of appeal. I do understand why someone wanted to tell this story, even as it was unfolding in real time. It was mesmerizing to see what the next thing was going to be. So, of course, this was going to be a movie that was going to be made.
Yeah.
And given the vision and the style of this, inevitably, it's also going to be compared to something like The Big Short, which I think is great.
Yeah. That movie really set a movement, didn't it?
Well, and that's where I wanted to go next, because Hollywood has this huge problem. We've talked about this before on the show.
Yeah.
When something is successful, Hollywood tries their damnedest to regurgitate that formula at all costs. And many have done that with The Big Short and trying to recapture the magic of that film's style and tone and energy. And most of them have failed pretty miserably.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but a lot of them for sure.
Ironically, most of those biggest failures actually came from the same director as The Big Short.
Yes, that's true. Even himself, that's something that Hollywood likes to do. So The Big Short, I think, is great. I don't think the film should be punished because of the precedent it set, but it did. Like The Dark Knight has done, like so many films before.
Social Network, I feel like that was almost
Network.
a blueprint that led into The Big Short as well.
Absolutely.
You can definitely find a trail there.
Yeah, you could point to a bazillion movies that set precedents for better or worse.
Yeah.
Because Hollywood has this addiction problem. They have a drug habit. We know that. But when it comes to
they spend a lot of dumb money.
They spend a lot of dumb money. Absolutely. And I think my biggest problem with this film, aside from its mimicry, is how uninspired it is.
Yeah.
And that does bleed into the direction of it and the style and the tone of the energy. It doesn't come near the heights of something like The Big Short in that regard. But even from a storytelling perspective, most of this narrative's important beats are told to us through montage. We never actually see it. It is told to us. The film does not trust the audience, and as a result, the characters are empty shells. It refuses. This film refuses to explore the how and the why behind this movement. We see a couple of scenes of Keith, the Paul Dano character here, doing his YouTube videos, and why he would have been a unique personality. But in terms of how he galvanized the YouTube community, how he galvanized the Reddit page in Wall Street Bets, it's never on the screen. There are supporting characters who respond vaguely to Keith, but the true emotion behind it all and why they would have felt propelled to follow Keith, I think is very hollow in this film. It's all very superficial and vacuous. As you noted, Brendan, it plays out like a Wikipedia page. It is bullet point by bullet point. Here's what happened. And it's extremely disjointed, extremely uninspired. And that to me made for an extremely frustrating experience. I do think the humor is effective. I think Pete Davidson is actually very good here. He has great comedic timing. Paul Dano, as you noted, is great. But the beating heart of this story and what makes it so compelling as a David versus Goliath is absent. And whatever is there is hollow. Most of what's important about this story is just told to us through these banal montages. The film doesn't understand how to demonstrate the galvanizing that took place. It doesn't understand social media or Reddit or TikTok and why those things were important to this story. It's just not there.
And that's what I was really missing here too, is that there is a fascinating angle that you could have added to this. And that's not to say that I wish this movie was something different, but the movie does have genuine interest, or at least it attempts to have an interest in, the power of blog warfare, especially from the perspective of those who are part of the lower working class, and how that relates to these rich hedge fund managers and CEOs, and the shorting that they actually participate in as a form of manipulation for how they want to see the stock market go. And we have people like, not when I say us, I don't mean you and I specifically. I mean the royal us, just everyday people who just know how to use a computer, know how to network with each other, who are not dumb. They know how these things operate. Yet this quote unquote army that forms to take down these hedge funds, and why they decided to latch on to GameStop, I can't tell you why. There's another thing here that's missing, is the love of video game culture and why this business was important to so many people. And if there's any message I can take from this, the business itself didn't really matter. It really was all about the blog warfare, but that's kind of not enough, especially when, video game culture is still kind of part of everyday life in its own way. I think there's definitely a parallel you can make into this story. And I guess that's a long-winded way of me saying that this movie is just a bunch of missed opportunities. And I think those missed opportunities could have been explored if this were perhaps a miniseries as opposed to a movie. This really feels like a greatest hits of scenes from a series. That's how this operates. And I think as such, you mentioned the sense of humor here. It has some of that, but you compare that to I, Tonya, for instance, which is a very biting and energetic movie.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly this is trying to go for the same thing. And I think it only gets there maybe like 20% of the time. And each of those 10% are because 10% lies with Paul Dano, 10% lies with Pete Davidson. Like that's their dynamic is really what drives the humor. Yeah. You have Seth Rogen here to dump exposition. You have Vincent D'Onofrio here to dump exposition. You have Sebastian Stan, another talented actor, here to dump exposition. Like that's more or less their function here, and it's really frustrating.
No, I completely agree. The Wall Street characters here, as you just aptly articulated, they are here to narratively give us the other side of the coin, to demonstrate that these are greedy one-note villains. And look, we've talked about this quite a bit over the summer when talking about Hollywood executives. Maybe there is credence to the fact that these are in real life mustache twirling villains.
If we criticize them for being one-dimensional, that's not the problem. The problem is that they're just not entertaining to watch.
Well, that's why I wanted to make a distinction. Them being greedy mustache twirly villains, I honestly have no problem with. That will never be a criticism for me moving forward.
Exactly.
But dramatically speaking, they're simply here to demonstrate that someone lost $1 billion in this mess.
Yeah.
And while I do not have sympathy for hedge fund billionaires losing money, I don't think these characters offer anything of real value. And they take time away from supporting characters that really could have benefited from having more screen time. Perhaps satirically or comedically, there's something of meaning there with them, but there really isn't much beyond that. I would have rather have seen, I think the film, and I don't want to get into a rabbit hole of what I would have wanted or what I would have done, but I think the film would have benefited, because where I do criticize this film genuinely is that it is disjointed from a storytelling perspective, where it's, of course, on Keith Gill, and his home life, how that connects with Pete Davidson's Kevin character. And then we're moving on to, the hedge funds. And then there's the supporting characters, the community that is supposed to be representative of what Keith is galvanizing regarding YouTube and Wall Street Bets, the Reddit page. And there are a few characters such as America Ferrera's character here and a few others, college students. And those characters, to me, come and go so uninspiredly, and we barely get to know them. And
too many of them.
There's too many of them, and I feel like there's a lot of their character that gets lost in the editing of trying to tell this story like it's a Wikipedia page. And that's where I agree with you. If this was a series instead of a film, or you extend this out and you make it a Martin Scorsese 3-hour epic. Yeah. Imagine this film, Wolf of Wall Street style, in Martin Scorsese's hands. Perhaps that's where this as a film could have benefited. Yeah. However, as it is, the way Craig Gillespie tells this story in, 2 hours, 104 minutes, there's so much that gets lost. Yep. And that's where the galvanizing, or the lack thereof, which is so important to this story, is missing for me. Yeah. Like we see him do a couple of YouTube videos, and sometimes that's connected to these supporting characters, and sometimes it's not. And and the Reddit stuff of this, which is vital to this story, is almost exclusively absent here. And when it is on the screen, it is, again, inside of these montages that mean nothing.
Well, yeah, and that's why I mentioned having this as a miniseries could have been beneficial, because much like Pam and Tommy, the other miniseries I referenced earlier, which is they're not every episode is directed by Craig Gillespie, but he did direct most of them, and it does carry his DNA. If there is, if you ever watch Pam and Tommy, I think it's on Hulu if I'm not mistaken, you could definitely sense the I, Tonya energy all over it, even on the episodes that Craig Gillespie didn't direct. I think he may have been like an executive producer on it as well, maybe a co-creator or something like that. But much like that series, and much like Dumb Money, they both sort of have three competing narratives and three different perspectives. So with Pam and Tommy, you have that of Pamela Anderson, you have that of Tommy Lee, and then you have the Seth Rogen, Nick Offerman side of Rand and Milty, I believe their names are. And they're all sort of told like in this interlocking way, but because you only have four characters, or four people rather, there's more of a seamless energy that could be derived from that.
Sure.
And with Dumb Money, there is in some ways three competing narratives here. You have that of Paul Dano, you have that of these hedge fund managers, and then you have the sub community of Reddit users that follow Paul Dano. The problem is that each of those Reddit users are like a character in their own narrative. And I think that should have been its own interlocking story, to have this sense of community and collectivity, whether they know each other or not. You can create that sense with these interlocking people having similar purposes. And I think that's where the film really drops the ball. It doesn't know how to interlock all of these moving pieces together, when honestly, it could have just been simpler. Like there is definitely room for simplicity here that I don't think this movie abides to, at least from a movement standpoint. The story is very simple, but the way it moves, the way it interlocks everything, it tries too hard to give everyone a perspective and a voice that ultimately hardly anyone has a perspective and a voice then.
I completely agree. And when we're talking about the Reddit community or the YouTube community, which is represented in the Jennifer character, just to bring clarity to it, the Marcos character played by Anthony Ramos,
who I really like here. I love his interactions with his manager at GameStop.
Yeah,
is really entertaining.
It is very funny. Again, I don't have an issue with the humor of this film. It is rather great. So you have Jennifer, Marcos, and then the third pair here is the college students, Riri and Harmony.
Yeah.
Who at times are often engaging as well, comedically.
Yeah.
Especially when we talk about their roommate, or one of them's roommate, who comes and goes throughout the film. There's some really great gags with her as well.
I could have seen more of it though. I would have welcomed more of it.
Yeah, I mean, as a comedy, I do think the film is effective. I am not degrading this film at all in that regard. I laughed a lot. And like you, in the theater, while I was immensely frustrated because of its drama and it functioning as a Wikipedia story, I was entertained because of these performances, and the comedy is genuinely very good. However, when we're talking about that narrative structure that you just articulated, in particular, when we're looking at it through the prism of the Reddit YouTube community, those three characters, it's disjointed. And I think my other issue is I feel like there's a disconnect between them as Reddit users and how they're interacting with Keith in a direct way. And I think that's where the film's montage has become problematic, because there is no direct connection. It's Keith telling us how he feels. Then there's giant vomiting of a montage that is disassociated from those three characters, or those three groups of characters there.
Yeah.
And so when they come into the fold, they're not responding to anything Keith is saying directly. They're responding to this vague overall ethos that he's putting out on the internet. And that, to me, feels hollow. There's nothing of substance there. And because everything is happening quickly, there's not enough here for it to feel like it is doing anything of meaning or having value from a character perspective. Like, I think of that moment with Jennifer at the gas station, and she's talking with this guy, and we see her loneliness out in front. Man, I wanted way more. Like, that to me is when this film is at its best. And because we're seeing a direct effect of her emotions with how all of this is playing out. But those moments are so far and few in between.
Well, and that's a great point, because it proves that you can get away with what's missing here by doing very simple things that don't necessarily require any dialogue or any story or plot. Really, the only time that I feel any type of, I guess, real emotional drama here is when the weight of, I keep forgetting Paul Dano. Who's he playing again?
Keith Gill.
Keith Gill, that's it.
Yeah.
I was having a massive brain fart on who he was playing. Obviously
Okay.
a real person, Keith Gill. Yeah. But like when the weight of Keith's actions start to weigh on not just him but his family, and how he recognizes the power of the community that he essentially created without realizing that he was creating it. Essentially, that is where there is some potential drama here, and you kind of feel that because Paul Dano's is really effective in the role, and his chemistry with Shailene Woodley is also very good.
I agree.
So like the movie has the ingredients, it has the right pieces at play.
Yeah.
They just don't interlock. And those moments that you're talking about, let's say with America Ferrera, they're way too few and far in between, because everyone else within this digital community that supports Keith, I can't really tell you anything about them as people.
Yeah, I agree.
Outside of the fact that they played a part in this story, they played a part in maneuvering this story, this real life story, into where it ended up going.
Yeah.
Like that's all I can say about them.
I agree. I mean, I think the best biopics are, and I know that there is a larger story to be told here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are two ways to approach this. Again, you could do it with a Wolf of Wall Street, Martin Scorsese perspective, and it's 3.5 hours long, or whatever that movie is, or Killers of the Flower Moon, which is 3.5 hours long. You could tell it that way. Or what I prefer, because not everyone is a Martin Scorsese, you do it like the Miles Davis film from 2015.
You focus on a particular sliver, one person, yes. and that's a great point too, because we live in a digital age. We can sense that community and the power of that community through digital interaction. What if we never met that community that this movie is also focusing on?
Yeah.
What if it was strictly Keith's not reaction, but his communication in relation to them through the YouTube sphere, and that was somehow like projected from that, and we could actually sense that while watching the movie? That would have been a very brilliant touch.
Exactly. Or we talked about Pablo Larraín here on the show. I think about Jackie or Spencer. Those films are from a particular slice of time in their lives, and we rarely leave their perspective.
Yeah.
I think this film could have been really powerful if the entire emphasis on it was exactly what you're saying, where we never see the ramifications outside of Keith. It's him wrestling with why he truly believes in GameStop, why he's making the choices he does, and him grappling with the fallout, which we never really see in a deep or truthful way here, because it's all about the larger things that are happening. I would have loved to have heard him talk more, like really wrestle with why this Reddit page was hinging on everything that he did. And that is one thing we do see here, where characters talk about, well, what is Keith doing? Is he selling, or is he holding on?
It's
and that's a lot of weight on his shoulders, whether he knew that or not. But we don't know, because this film refuses to explore the how or the why here.
I have to make another comparison here, because it is top of mind given some recent interviews with wonderful filmmaker Spike Lee. But it's like if Oppenheimer chose to show the bombing sequence of Hiroshima, right?
That's a great
and seeing
point.
that perspective, but it strictly focuses on Oppenheimer himself. So we get a very harrowing sequence.
That.
Yeah, we never leave that, which weirdly makes the movie more harrowing and more interpretive then.
How much less impactful would that gym sequence be if we left his perspective and we saw the explosion in Japan?
Yeah. Or the executive who said, let's not bomb Tokyo because I've been there before with my wife. That's where I went on my honeymoon. Like that is a chilling sequence because of the perspective.
Exactly. Could not have said it better myself. That's why that film is so striking and visceral and harrowing. And this film is really doing the antithesis of that.
Well, I got to be careful with how I made that comparison because I'm not saying that the Reddit community here is the equivalent of bombing Hiroshima.
No. It's
but it's a similar narrative tactic.
Maintaining a singular focus, which this film clearly does not have or want or desires. But I do think there's an argument to be made that if it had an Oppenheimer-like approach, and it had that singular perspective, we could have really, like, Keith could have been one of those really rich characters where we get to know, again, not just his backstory, where he comes from, why he's doing this YouTube channel to begin with as a side hustle, why he wears the bandana that he does, why he's in love with cats, why, most importantly, why he's really in love with this stock. We only hear little glimpses of that early on. Again, it's very superficial. And then him wrestling with everyone, agreeing with his choice and fervently so, to the point where everyone was waiting for him to make a decision, and they followed him to the very end. A lot of them did.
Yeah. Okay, another comparison here, because I just made an Oppenheimer comparison, which is a movie that's 3 hours long, almost twice the length of Dumb Money, and only focuses on one perspective. You mentioned The Wolf of Wall Street as well. That's technically a movie with only one perspective for like 3 hours. Now, we have other characters there that are very fully fleshed out, but they're more or less extensions of Jordan Belfort, right? Showcasing the influence that he had. So, and here's a movie that's half the story, half the length, and it has what feels like 17 main characters. It's just not mathematically feasible. It's just not.
It's not. It's not feasible at all. And I think that is my biggest issue, is it wants to tell a large story with a lot of nuance to it, and why people were so attracted to this story from a larger perspective. That's hard to do in 104 minutes. Yeah. And as a result, these characters feel very hollow to me. Despite good performances, Paul Dano is great here. Yeah. I think he's very good. He gives as much to Keith, at least emotionally speaking. I think the writing around Keith is still very thin. That when it comes to the how and the why, there's still not much there. However, emotionally speaking, I do think he gives Keith something of value in that regard. And I did appreciate that in Dano's performance. So despite the writing, I think he's able to elevate that character to, something of meaning. Yeah. Pete Davidson is doing Pete Davidson. So Kevin isn't anything of true substance either. However,
he's entertaining.
He's a lot of fun. He's extremely entertaining.
Yeah.
And that's enough for me here.
He is entertaining, but there is still a level of sincerity to him when the plot needs him to be. And I think he sells those moments pretty well too. So they're actually like as far as Pete Davidson is concerned, I think this is perhaps one of his more layered performances. I mean, well, what was that other film? The King of Staten Island that he also did. So that's probably his best performance because he actually has the most to do. He is the star of that movie. So it's not really a fair comparison, but he does have a few different notes that he's juggling here with Dumb Money that I think he is mostly effective in.
Well, I will say this. Actually, now that I'm talking about it out loud here, Pete Davidson, I will actually go as far as to say, I think gives the second best performance in this film.
Is Paul Dano number one?
Behind Paul Dano.
I really like Shailene Woodley.
Shailene Woodley is great, but let me finish my thought here on Pete Davidson. Okay. Because from a comedic perspective, yes, he's great. His comedic timing, I think, is flawless, and he's entertaining. He's a little bit of a doofus. Some of the visual gags here, I think, are great, such as him being like an Uber Eats driver or DoorDash driver.
He has to deliver.
Like those little things, I think, are great. However, there are two moments here, dramatically, emotionally speaking, that I think are genuinely fantastic. When they go to the cemetery. Yep. There is a cut to Pete Davidson and his reaction to that moment that is striking emotionally. Even more so than Dano in the moment.
I agree. It works.
Really good.
Actually,
it's fantastic.
If I may cut you off briefly, but the moment leading up to that cemetery sequence,
In the car?
scene in the car,
Yeah.
because that still carries the comedic tone you would expect from a Pete Davidson, but in this case, you can really sense the brotherly jealousy at play. And this is a great scene as well because the plot and the story, they're not telling us that there's jealousy and a rift between these family members. It's all performative, and mostly it's because of Pete Davidson. The way that he jabs at his brother, you really can sense the rift there. Yeah, it really is.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And then it leads to that moment in the cemetery that honestly choked me up. And it was exclusively Pete Davidson. Dano is great for a different reason. His is more subtle, but I love that outward catharsis there from Davidson.
Agreed.
I did not expect that. And I think he delivers. And then 2 other quick scenes. There's the moment at, near the end when he gives Keith the pair of shoes and they have a raw, honest conversation with each other.
Yeah.
I think Davidson is also very good there.
I agree.
Also a little funny. He does bring some comedic chops to that as well, but dramatically, emotionally, he delivers in that way. And then I also look back at the moment where Keith is rehearsing or trying to rehearse what he's going to say in front of Congress. And Kevin is there with another friend of theirs, and they're just riffing and having a lot of fun. They're pretending to be Congress, asking Keith these questions, and they're just simply having a lot of fun. And there's something about the camaraderie of that moment that also felt genuine to me, which I loved.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think and you notice in any of those scenes, there's really no reliance on story. It's actually the moments that the film takes. It makes the biggest pauses, right?
Yeah. Wanted more of that. And again, that's where
this movie's so passionless, man. It really is.
All of the film's best scenes that I've been talking about, whether it be those moments with Keith and Kevin, or the moment I mentioned earlier with Jennifer at the gas station, the best moments of this film are simply when it comes down to performance. Yeah. And them articulating the humanity of these characters. Sadly, it's far and few in between because there's a lot of story that it feels, it has to tell. And that's where I did not find this film engaging or interesting at all. And while I have not seen the documentaries on this story, I imagine that you will learn as much, if not way more, by simply going and watching those documentaries, because this film, I don't think, is all that informative comparatively. It has an entertainment factor that I do appreciate, but dramatically speaking, it's very flat. Emotionally speaking, it's mostly flat as well.
Yeah, and like I said in my opening, I'm hit or miss on Craig Gillespie, but even here, I would have at least liked to see an attempt at his trademark humor, his trademark energy, and it's only here in moments. It's almost like he only directed maybe a quarter of the movie, and then it had to be filled in by studio execs and editors because he just wasn't on set. Like it only feels like he half directed this movie. And that's unfortunate because his energy can sometimes work in a movie like, let's say, I, Tonya. And this is clearly going for that kind of energy. I feel like this is, if anything, this is probably most comparable to something like an I, Tonya. And it has maybe a 16th of the energy of that film.
No, I completely agree. Another character that I wanted to bring up here as well, because earlier we were talking about Vincent D'Onofrio and Nick Offerman and Seth Rogen and how they portray these hedge fund managers that lost billions of dollars in this enterprise. I will say, I don't think that we need to know that specifically to understand this story. You can simply chalk it up to greedy hedge fund managers on Wall Street that are making lots of money on this. Because we know they are. That's fine. I want to know the characters that were galvanized because of Keith. I want to know about Keith. I want to know about the YouTube community and the Reddit community and the social media aspect of it. That to me is the most important thing here. However, I will say this. When it comes to Wall Street, the one character that I feel like should have been here more and should have been should have had a much bigger role.
Yeah.
Is Sebastian Stan's Vlad character.
I agree. Because he is directly linked to that community. He and his partner run that app, Robinhood, I think it's called.
Robinhood. So, they are so vital to this story. And if you're not vaguely familiar with Robinhood, if you've never watched the documentaries on this story, that's going to be very confusing to a lot of people who just watch this movie, who walk in blind. Yeah. That is not articulated well at all.
Kind of assumes you already know about it.
It does, for better or worse.
Which is a very cheap tactic. I mean, at least in this case, I feel like it's a cheap tactic. But sometimes it can work in a film's favor if you're actually treating the audience like they're smart. And certain movies that maybe aren't based on like data, like literal data and fact, you can, if they're not based on that, you can sometimes get around that and be a little bit more vague with your choices. But here, I think it needed to be a bit more pronounced in order to make that clear. Yeah. But you're right. I think if any of those quote unquote executive people needed to have an impact here, it is Sebastian Stan, because he is directly linked to that community. Yes. And if anything, he's the one that most represents the ignorance and, dare I say, stupidity of this other side of the coin. Yeah. I think that interview that he gives where he's clearly unsure of how to handle himself is actually a very entertaining and satisfying scene. Yeah. But it just, in a weird way, it's also a problem because it sort of renders Nick Offerman, Vincent D'Onofrio, and Seth Rogen kind of moot here. Like it just renders them useless then. Yeah.
They're only here to demonstrate that someone lost $1 billion. And look, it makes for a fun moment in the trailer. But when Seth Rogen's Gabe character reveals that, hey, I lost $1 billion today. How much did we lose yesterday? $1 billion. You know, it's a great moment.
They could have been played by anybody. They could have been played by anybody.
And look, that doesn't really mean anything to me because we know that someone lost a lot of money in this process. I don't care who. The one thing I do care about is how it affects the characters directly that we are invested in. Yeah. And that is Keith and those that he had galvanized. Mm-hmm. And Robinhood is such a significant part of that because that's the app that people obviously use to make their investments. Yep. And there's something that they did when they paused the ability to buy. That was a huge moment in time. Huge controversy. Mm-hmm. And how they came to that decision is barely mentioned in this movie. And it's such a huge part of this story, and we don't really get to know them as characters. And that's the one character losing money that actually does matter here. Yeah. Gabe losing $15 billion or whatever he did and then getting bought out, like whatever.
I think it was 6.8 and then he got bought. Yeah, he got bought out by.
Don't care. Don't care. But the Robinhood part of it does matter because that there was a direct connection to our central characters here. And, the film needed to spend way more time articulating that.
Well, and if you wanted to make these hedge fund managers threatening in any way, sometimes the facelessness of these people could even be more threatening. And not to say that they need to be frightening individuals, because I think the comedic nature is kind of appropriate as well. But I also think of some movies that I didn't love, like a movie like She Said, for instance. Harvey Weinstein is not in that movie. No one plays him, but he lingers in the background, right?
What about Kitty Green's The Assistant?
That's another great example.
You know, again, the Harvey Weinstein character, we never see the face, and he's mostly gone. Like it's an empty office through a lot of that film, but even when he's there, the head is cut off, and so we never actually see him, and it's just this threatening, intimidating presence just because of the power he has and what we know of the character to be, and how the film goes about demonstrating that is great. So even though we don't actually see a face, we hardly see a figure that even represents that office, and it's still so effective.
I feel like these people, these hedge fund CFOs and CEOs, I feel like they're only here as characters so the movie can use text to show what their net worth is.
Yeah.
Which is not a reason to make him not a reason. It's not a reason to make him a character.
And look, you're already telling us everything anyway instead of showing us. Tell us that then. Just tell us that thing and show us everything else. I could have lived with that.
Me too. Me too.
But show me. Like, the film just doesn't, all of the most important stuff to this story is never on screen. It's just told to us.
Yeah, it really is.
Or it's in a boring ass montage. That's it.
I will say, if there is any success to this movie, and this is not it's not really a success. It's once again another backhanded compliment. It did make me interested in reading the source material, the Antisocial Network, I think it's called, which I have not read, but I am genuinely interested in reading that because this story is fascinating. So the movie, if it does any good job, it may be interested in this story, but the movie doesn't necessarily do a good job in fully articulating the story. But that's what the movie's job is. So I have to be hard on it for that.
Absolutely. I agree. Do you have any final thoughts? I don't know if I do. That's about it for me.
Looking at Craig Gillespie's filmography, I think this is one of his lesser films. I really do, because I think it's his biggest missed opportunity. Certainly not as good as Lars and the Real Girl, or AKA Barbie prequel. It's not as good as I, Tonya either. I might like it more than Cruella overall, but that first half of Cruella is actually very good.
I definitely prefer Cruella to this.
That movie just falls off so hard in its final act. It's hard for me to say if I like it more. That's such a Tale of Two Halves movie. Oh man, I wanted to like that more given the string of Disney live action remakes. I like Fright Night more than this as well. I think that's a very entertaining movie.
I agree. No, I much prefer. I much prefer I, Tonya, much prefer Lars and the Real Girl, prefer Cruella. It sounds like I'm still a little higher on that than you.
I think so.
Hell, I might even prefer $1 Million Arm over this. And
that's
that
a charming movie.
It's charming. Like, at least that's a film that knows what it is and leans into it with sincerity.
That's fair.
There's nothing inspiring about Dumb Money. There are parts of it that are good.
Yeah,
for sure. There are parts of it that are good. I won't deny that. But on the whole, it is so disjointed and so uninspired I think I would take $1 Million Arm over it.
Well,
and
you also have John Hamm. That he makes everything better.
Can't go wrong there. Exactly. I'll probably take it over The Finest Hours, although I think you could argue that The Finest Hours is a little bit more of a seamless movie. But I don't know if the quality is quite there.
Yeah.
But all these others, this is for sure lesser Craig Gillespie for me.
It is. Yeah. And it shouldn't have been. Like this is up his wheelhouse. I think he could have handled it better. I
agree. I do want to reiterate Paul Dano is very good here. I know he's been getting a lot of praise for this, and he should. He is the beating heart of it, and I do think he elevates the character that is written on the page, which I don't think is all that fascinating.
Yeah.
But he does bring life to the character and a poignancy that I do really appreciate.
Yep.
And Pete Davidson may be underrated. In this.
Yeah. I think he's very good. I think he's very good.
I know a lot of people do like this, so if you disagree with us, that's fine.
Yeah. Let us know why.
You can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening to the show, just reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com as well. I think that's it.
Yeah.
For now.
Yeah.
Brendan, how your last episode as a free man?
As a free man,
how do you feel?
I'm excited.
The next time Brendan is on the show, he will be taking up.
I'll have a ring on it. He'll have a ring on it.
I
mean, Maris and I talk about this all the time. We kind of feel like we're married already. Like, if anything, we're just throwing a party for our closest family and friends.
Hey, that's
really what it is.
How it is. Yeah.
But I am looking forward to it. We actually booked a band for this instead of a DJ. So at some point during one of the breaks, my band is going to get on stage and play a few songs. At least that's the hope. I'm trying to work out the logistics from a technical standpoint, if we can even get that done, because weirdly booking a DJ that would have made it so much easier to have us go on and play a few songs, because now we have to work alongside this existing setup and try and sandwich ourselves into that. It's actually very challenging, but
yeah,
this way you'll actually get to hear me play music for once, JD.
I know, which I never have.
I know.
So this will be exciting.
You may have heard me do karaoke a few times while we were in Kentucky, but that's probably the most of it.
Yeah, that's, I think, as far as it's gone. Yeah, I don't think I've ever. I think I might have seen you guys play on Facebook or something during COVID.
Oh yeah, during the COVID days, when bands were only doing live streaming on Facebook and Instagram because that's all they can do with the venues being closed down. Yeah, we did 2 of those. So you may have seen that. I forgot about those.
Yeah, but I've never seen you in person because I haven't seen you in 8 years. So that we're gonna fix that.
We're gonna fix that. There's gonna be a lot of drinking. There's gonna be a lot of
Absolutely. Very much looking forward to that. Stay tuned though for the main show this week. We'll have a guest on. I think we're talking horror films, I think is the plan. So you can stay tuned for that. And there was a new movie out right now. William Friedkin's last film is out. We're going to try to get a review of that up as well. I have seen it. I do have some thoughts on it. So
I hear it's pretty good.
Yeah, very much did enjoy it. I'll say that for now.
Good to hear.
More than this. More than dumb money. Anyway, with all of that said, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Show us, Brendan.
Don't
tell me.
Show me the money.